TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GBNews,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Defence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, good afternoon. It's 4 o'clock. Welcome to GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. And for the next 2 hours, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. This show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course, it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today is the consultant editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and former Liberal Democrat MP, David Appic. Before we get started, let's get your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. It's Polly Middlehurst in the GB newsroom. And the headlines. The Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries is calling for a formal investigation into the violent scenes at the Champions League final in Paris last night between Liverpool and Real Madrid. The government's investigating what UK police say was the worst violent scene at a European football match. UEFA says thousands of fans tried to enter the grounds with fake tickets. Liverpool defender Andy Robertson has criticised the police handling of the event. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Defence says the Royal Air Force and the Royal Navy will be protecting fans at the Qatar World Cup. Defence Secretary Ben Wallace says British personnel will join forces with their Qatari counterparts to tackle terrorism and other threats to the tournament. The FIFA World Cup in the country is due to start on November the 21st. To the United States, and President Joe Biden and his wife Jill are today in the state of Texas to pay their respects to the families of those killed in Tuesday's mass school shooting. 19 primary-age children and 2 of their teachers were murdered by a gunman at Robb Elementary School in the town of Uvalde. It's the third mass shooting in the United States in the last few weeks. The Vice President, Kamala Harris, says the country should have the courage to take action.
We are not sitting around waiting to figure out what the solution looks like. You know, we're not looking for a vaccine. We know what works on this. It includes, let's have an assault weapons ban. You know what an assault weapon is? You know how an assault weapon was designed? It was designed for a specific purpose, to kill a lot of human beings quickly.
Meanwhile, Ukraine's President Zelensky has visited troops on the front lines in the northeast of the country today. The visit marks his first official appearance outside of the Kyiv region since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February. Ukraine's military say their forces are continuing to resist Russia's assault in the east. Officials say in Donetsk, the largest city there, is still held, but Ukrainian troops are weathering heavy artillery barrages today. Environmental campaigners have deflated the tyres of 20 4x4 cars in Edinburgh as part of their campaign to deter people from driving vehicles in cities. The group has been deflating the tyres of SUVs across the UK, with one member estimating they've targeted around 4,000 cars this year. A spokesperson for Edinburgh Tyre Extinguishers says 4x4s are unnecessary and are massive killer vehicles. But Police Scotland have called their actions reckless and urged for drivers to check their tyres before they drive off. The Labour Party is to push for a vote on the Prime Minister's decision to change the ministerial code of conduct. Critics say Boris Johnson's proposals watered down the rules. But the Cabinet Office says it's disproportionate for ministers to lose their job for what they say might be minor breaches. The changes mean they'll instead face a salary suspension or will need to issue a public apology. And as the UK prepares to celebrate Her Majesty's Jubilee, the Prime Minister says no monarch has served the country so well. In a personal message to the Queen, Boris Johnson thanked her for her exemplary service, praising the institution of the Crown and the exceptional individual who wears it. The Prime Minister also described the Queen as a steadying, guiding force for the nation, adding Her Majesty embodied the very idea of what a constitutional monarchy should be. Tributes have been pouring in for the legendary jockey Lester Piggott, who has died at the age of 86.
Never say die was that 18-year-old marvel of the saddle, Lester Piggott.
The 11-time champion and winner of 30 classics was widely regarded as one of the greatest horse riders of all time. Fellow jockey Frankie Dettori said Lester was his hero, and his impact that he made in the racing world was second to none. Willie Carson, who shared the saddle with Piggott in the 70s and 80s, said, "I feel as if I've lost part of my life, in a way." You're with GB News, more news as it happens. Now let's return to Nana Akua.
Good afternoon. It's fast approaching 6 minutes after 4 o'clock. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, is it me or has the world gone totally mad? The British sense of humour has been eroded and we are literally not allowed to laugh at anything. What happened to the old adage, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the kitchen? Now it's, if you can't stand the heat, we'll turn the temperature down to accommodate you, and so sorry that you have hurty feelings. I mean, take this latest outrage over Ricky Gervais, who is a comedian, by the way. We live in a free society where freedom of speech is key, obviously with checks and balances on decency, but a society where context is king. Ricky Gervais is basically trying to make you laugh, and he takes the mick out of everyone. Unfortunately, he dared to venture into the trans debate in his legendary style. This is a bit of what he said.
Now it's the old-fashioned with it, and now the old-fashioned, they're like, oh, they want to use our toilets. Why shouldn't they use your toilets? For ladies. They are ladies. Look at their pronouns.
Now, if you don't like his humour, which isn't being chucked in your face or told at you, you're entitled to give it a wide berth. But oh no, in this new Britain that in my eyes is quickly nudging towards a communist state where language is policed like in Russia, a new hate strategy concocted by the Home Office could criminalise comedians like Ricky Gervais for making jokes. The Home Office have come up with the strategy to increase the reporting of all forms of hate crime, including those related to gender identity. They've come up with this term, a non-crime hate incident, or NCHI, and they're encouraging people to report them. Sounds idyllically naive. So they aren't really crimes, they're non-crimes, but will supposedly make people feel better and more protected once reported. Here's the sinister bit. They will go on a file, and if a perpetrator of an NCHI, I can't be bothered to say the whole thing, has lots of them, then the police may well see a pattern developing, and these could be unearthed if the person went, say, for a job in childcare or teaching. There are already laws to protect people from abuse. We don't need extra ones. The police need to be given more resource to be able to catch more than the 6% of the criminals that they catch under the existing laws. Making more crimes but non-crimes is ridiculous. And what about the checks and balances to make sure that these reported incidents are actually genuine? Doesn't it expose itself to bias and manipulation? And what about freedom? Freedom of speech? In response to Ricky Gervais's comments, Rachel Maskell, MP, said this on LBC.
Today it's about a trans person. Who is it about tomorrow? And obviously that builds tension in our communities as well. We've got to support people who are particularly vulnerable and to ensure that people are embraced and feel that they've got a place in our society. There is no space for him.
Did you hear what she said? There is no space for this. I think that's actually worse. I'm tempted to report that. Something that might make you laugh, might make me cry. We are in danger of losing our sense of humour. So before we get stuck into the debate, here's what else is coming up today. Now, every Sunday at 5 o'clock in Outside, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP or someone who's had an extremely interesting life, to take a look at life outside the job. We talk highs, lows and lessons learnt and what comes next on the outside. And today, I'll be joined by Errol Lawson. He's a former member of the Birmingham crime gangs. He robbed, he carried weapons, he mugged, fought and smoked drugs. He's since turned his life around and is now a pastor and an author who helps people avoid the lifestyle that he had. In today's Great British Debate, I'm asking, is the Prime Minister Boris Johnson an asset or a liability? The calls for Boris Johnson to resign continue. The latest Conservatives to stick the boot in are former Health Minister Steve Bryan and Newton Abbott MP and Anne-Marie Morris. But Michael Gove has today leapt to the defence of the Prime Minister, saying that he is the right man for the job. So for the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, is Boris Johnson an asset or a liability? And in Worldview, we'll be looking into the gun laws in America. The issue of a gun and ownership of one is being debated in the United States once again after gunmen opened fire in a school in Texas, killing 19 children and 2 teachers. US President Joe Biden will be visiting Robb Elementary School later to console those who are mourning. We'll also get an update on Ukraine. That's coming up in the next hour. Tell me what you think on everything we're discussing. As ever, you can email gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at gbnews. Right, so let's get started. Welcome again to my panel, consultant editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and former Liberal Democrat MP, Lembit Opik. Right, so let's start with this. Police crime hate incidents. I'm going to start with you, Andrew. What do you think about this?
It does my head in. I can't stand all of this. What is the Home Office thinking of? Priti Patel is a tough Thatcherite Home Secretary, or supposedly. She's a law and order person. She's a Thatcherite. This is ridiculous. All this obsession with so-called hate crimes. If someone called me a stupid puff and I complained to the police, that would be a hate crime. It isn't a hate crime. It's just someone using mindless abuse. And, and we've become too obsessed by it. And what we want the police to do is get out on the beat, lock up offenders and actually investigate crime. We do not want the police spending hours looking at computer screens and looking for so-called hate crime. I could imagine, under the Home Office guidance, what Ricky Gervais said in his very funny comedy show, which was brilliant, and I've listened to the whole thing, will probably be one of those offences.
I mean, it is absurd. Lembit, your view?
You said yourself, we're losing our sense of humour. It's worse than that. We're losing our sense of free thinking. There are some people who genuinely think homosexuality is wrong. They've got the right to have that debate, as long as they do it respectfully and they don't create violence. Now, what I'm really worried about here is the complete politicisation of policing. One of the items there in the news was about people, idiots, letting down car tyres. Now, imagine if you're a mum, you've just picked up your kids and you get into the car. That could lead to death. Now, why aren't the police apprehending people who could actually be killing people in cars? Instead, as well, it's a statement about the environment. And instead, they introduce something which the police, as you said, Andrew, have no time to do. What about knife crime in London? That's killing people, not just hurting their feelings. My feeling now is pretty much what you said in your opening comments. We are losing a sense of perspective. In a free society, you've got the right to cause offence. And here's the biggest point. As you said yourself, if you don't like Ricky Gervais's humour, then don't pay to go and see it. Or turn over. We've got 200 television channels, and at some point we are actually going to squash everything which intellectual, clever, independent-minded people would describe as a tolerant society.
We need to find out too, is this going to be Labour Party policy? Rachel Maskell, Labour MP, says effectively cancel Ricky Gervais. Is that Labour Party policy now? If we don't think comedians are funny, if some people might be offended? And can I ask as well, why is the trans community always the one that's to be wrapped in cotton wool? Less than a tenth of 1%. I don't think it's the trans people themselves, because I talked about this on my LBC show on Friday. 2 trans women called my show to say, A, they were not offended by my criticism of the criticism of Ricky Gervais, but they said it is the activists who are campaigning on their behalf who are causing all the trouble for the trans community. You know, the Telegraph reported on Saturday, there are now 100 different definitions of gender being used in Whitehall. 100. And I read some of them out to the trans women. They never... Do you know what gender cowboy is? Do you know what gender is?
It's just been made up recently.
Well, it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. But this is in Whitehall. This is Whitehall that runs the country, are using these ridiculous phrases, and civil servants are being tested on it. There should be a big revolt against this.
Well, you'd think, and as you said, civil servants have been tested on it. I read an article today in the Telegraph about exactly that. And it's just ridiculous. They've got so much to do in government. We are facing cost of living crisis. We're facing all the things. We've got high crime. Crime is rising. Everything is literally going to hell in a handcart. And they're talking about policing language, comedy, which is actually the thing that helps to give you some sort of light relief from all of this that is going on now.
I had... I used to have an asymmetric face. It was from... I had it a bit...
What used to, mate?
You see, that should be a crime.
Arrest her.
I'm afraid,
Put it on the list, alongside all my monologues.
I work with St Bartholomew's. They've spent years doing, well, this much. Maybe there's more work to do, but this much trying to fix things up. And they will tell you that a lot of people, especially teenagers who have asymmetric faces and other defects, they're very sensitive to it. Why don't we just make it illegal to make any comment about anyone's physical appearance as well, then? Because actually that means an awful lot more to a lot more people than this utter nonsense, frankly. Now, I can talk about I'm 57, but I was really very shy because of my appearance. But where do you draw the line? At the end of the day, the real answer is, give me the tools to manage it, because, frankly, it shouldn't have mattered to me as much as it did. But instead what we're saying is, you've got the right to be offended. Why not give them all free counselling and just let the knife crime continue and then arrest people like Ricky Gervais who are actually trying to have a laugh? And the other thing about comedy is it's often pathos about a society. If we're going to now say you can't poke fun at society, then we might as well give up on democracy now.
Well, it's what gets you through, isn't it? I mean, that's how you get by. I make jokes and humour when I can see something's ridiculous, because otherwise, if you don't laugh, you'll end up crying. And it's almost as... I'm getting very worried now, because there aren't... It seems to be that the people like us who are prepared to speak out seem to be diminishing and being pushed into a corner. And actually, if you then speak, I'm afraid you'll be arrested. Or, I mean, look at Russia. There was a journalist who spoke out. She had the sign talking about the war in Ukraine. And what happened to her? Well, I mean, I read a bit about her. Because she spoke out so vocally, that's actually the thing that's kept her safe. But had she not done it so vocally and visually, she may well be in jail for 15 or 10 years or whatever the deal is.
But, you know, the Conservative Party, the Conservative government is behind in the polls. That's you'd expect mid-term. They could start to turn things around if they made a stand against this woke nonsense, because that's what it is. Nadine Dorries is a very forthright cabinet minister. I've talked to her about this, and she objects to it. I can't believe the Prime Minister supports all this. So why don't they engage with it? Why don't they embrace it? And why don't they go into woke Whitehall and say, right, get rid of these 100 definitions. You're a man or a woman, and can we have a conversation with the leader of the Labour Party, who seems to think when he's asked, can only a woman have a service, it's not a straightforward question. Yes, it is. It's a very straightforward question, and it's got a very straightforward answer. And by the way, men have penises, women don't. This is a problem for the official opposition, the Labour Party. Just imagine if they get into power, or how it's going to change.
Well, that's true.
So this is why the Tories have got to stop this now.
Let's rename it Woke-all and just give up completely.
Well, Debbie Hayton was in the studio yesterday.
She's great.
She's fabulous. And she was saying that, no, a woman doesn't have a penis. You know, and she was... And, you know, we were responding to Stella Creasy, who seems to think that a woman does have a penis, or you can't say whether she might have. She might have, and she doesn't. I mean,
and look at the abuse that J.K. Rowling suffered because she dares to speak out. Now, she can stand the heat in the kitchen. She's a very successful author with millions of followers. But how shameful that those actors that nobody would ever have heard of, who were in the Harry Potter series, Emma Watson, Daniel Radcliffe, ignored her when it came to the 20th anniversary of Harry Potter. They would have nothing to do with her. appalling. That is censorship.
But it's all part of the... I'm not going to do my usual speech about climate, but...
Oh, no, I love it when you do.
OK, there is no climate emergency. And anybody, any Green who disagrees, come onto this show, have the courage to sit where Andrew's sitting and explain why I'm wrong. But when I say that, people go, you mustn't say that. And the BBC...
I remember.
The BBC have a policy which says they don't have to provide balance. You can actually say wrong things about the environmental debate and not be chanced, but I could go and say what I've said now, so, oh, that's very courageous, maybe we shouldn't have you on a show. That's how bad it's got, about gender matters, about the environment. And it's all OK in woke because apparently it doesn't really matter anymore if you're wrong, as long as you're on message.
Well, obviously, I mean, the BBC have their guidelines that they aim to follow as close to these guidelines as possible.
But they're funded by the taxpayer.
But of course,
we own the BBC.
That's right.
We are the BBC.
Yeah.
So but who are they to set these rules? People like Nigel Lawson, who was... Lender won't agree with his economics, but he was the great Thatcherite Chancellor. You'll never get him on the BBC because he's a climate change sceptic. He's banned. So the BBC are banning people.
Well, I know that when I was there, that was one of the things that you couldn't say. You wouldn't say that. That's just... And I know that from working there myself. That was my experience of it. But the worrying thing is it's the censorship of language, the policing of language, and also the inability... We're teaching a generation of people to actually not have a sense of humour. And that is worrying, because in a world where there's a lot of mental health issues, sense of humour is one of the big things that gets you by.
The great thing, that podcast of Ricky Gervais's will go... The sales of it and the views will go through the roof, because everybody will want to see it. And I tell you, watch it, listen to it, it's hilarious.
Fantastic. Well, if you just joined us, welcome on board. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now, after the break, it is time for our Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is Boris Johnson an asset or a liability? The Sue Gray report has been published. The Prime Minister has been fined for Partygate, but still some Conservatives are calling on him to resign. Send us your thoughts. What do you think? Is he an asset or liability? Email gbviews@gbnews.uk. Tell us your thoughts. You can also tweet at GBNews. There is a poll up asking that very question. Is Prime Minister Boris Johnson an asset or a liability? Cast your vote now, but first, it's the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking showery at first, although with showers fading away to leave clear spells. Let's take a look at those details. For Devon and Cornwall, a mixture of showers and sunny spells. The showers will still be on the heavy side at first, but will die away through the evening. For London, the evening is looking largely dry with some sunny spells, although the risk of a few showers remains. For Cardiff and South Wales, a few showers are likely this evening, but for many it will be dry with some sunny spells. It's a similar story across Birmingham and the Midlands, where the evening promises to give a scattering of mainly light showers with variable amounts of cloud and some sunny spells. A cloudier picture across parts of north-east England this evening, with a few spots of rain and some bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool along the east coast with wind off the sea. Rather cloudy at times for Edinburgh and southern Scotland, with a few showery outbreaks, but also with bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool, especially towards the east or under thicker cloud. And for Northern Ireland, the evening will see a familiar mix of sunny spells and a few scattered light showers, perhaps a touch breezy along the north coast. A dry night for most away from Scotland, cloudier in the north and turning chilly in the south under clear skies. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Just coming up to 24 minutes after 4 o'clock. You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. And you can also catch us up on the GB News app. Right, it's time for the Great British Debate this hour. And I'm asking, is Boris Johnson an asset or a liability? Former Tory leader Ian Duncan Smith said his party had been left with an enormous identity problem because it's raised taxes instead of cutting them. Two more MPs, former Health Minister Steve Bryan and Anne-Marie Morris, said that they have lost confidence in the Prime Minister, taking the total who have gone to public to 24. OK, but many have praised Boris Johnson for his support, the way he's handled the Ukraine issue and President Zelensky throughout the war, and he's also hailed for his bravery flying out to Ukraine to show solidarity. So what do you think? Is Boris Johnson an asset or a liability? I'm joined now by Paul Baines. He's a professor of political marketing at the University of Leicester. Right, so well, let's start with the main question. Do you think he's an asset or a liability, Paul?
Well, I think he has been a massive asset and he's become a massive liability in some ways, but that doesn't mean that he'll stay a massive liability. And I think at this point in the election cycle, there needs to be another, over 20, around 20 MPs that need to declare that they've no confidence in him for there to be a leadership election. So I think most MPs will be holding the line at the moment, determining, will this get any worse? And I suspect it won't, actually. This is probably... The Sue Gray report doesn't add much, other than detail. It doesn't add much more to the party problem. I think that in a sense, it doesn't appear like there's more damage to be done. So this is probably a flesh wound in the body politic, and it is damaging trust. But it hasn't so damaged trust that people are prepared to, leave him wholesale, I guess.
So in your view, the things that he's an asset, because you said he's both, a bit of both, what would you say? What are his highlights?
Well, the highlights are things like the vaccination programme, and the latest one, of course, is his stance on Ukraine, which has been very, very robust. And, of course, the cost of living crisis is one of those things where we're not quite sure yet, because it's just happening, and they've only started to put things in place like the money for support for heating bills and so on. So they're only just starting to respond to that properly. And I think, therefore, the jury's still out on how he's doing on that. But he has done a great job on. Some would argue not on Brexit, but he unblocked Brexit in a way that the two previous prime ministers couldn't. So I think that's an asset in his favour. But of course, against him is this idea that this is a government that doesn't behave according to the rules like every other government does and should. And I think that is doing. That has the potential to erode trust enormously. And if it stays that way, then I think he would be removed from the leadership in due course. But I think the jury's still out on whether he's or not. So you ask a great question, but I think it's too early in the election cycle for anything definitive to happen.
Do you think that perhaps the Conservatives, in his backbenchers and all those who are turning against him, are actually causing more of the problem?
Well, I'm not sure they've decided that they're not happy with the nature of his leadership, and I think that's their right. They have, it's their conscience. They believe a certain way, and so they should respond to how they believe. But they are a minority. I mean, it's 15% of Tory MPs are required in order to write letters into Sir Graham Brady for the 1922 committee. We think it's somewhere between around 25 previously. I guess they'd have to write in again, actually, because it was some time ago since some of them wrote. So they'd have to confirm that their letter still stood, I guess. But the point is that that's a fairly small proportion of these. And at the end of the day, that 15% are going to write in. But so if he is then kicked out, there could be another election, and he might win that again. He might stand again in that election and be elected again to the position, because where's the opposition? In terms of opposition, well, not the opposition, but who are the alternative candidates in a Conservative leadership? Would we have Liz Truss? She has stand. Might be.
Paul, your line...
Would she win? So...
Yeah. Paul, we're losing your line a little bit. It's going a bit up and down. So ultimately, you said he's both an asset and liability.
So I'm saying, would she win?
Yeah, I think
sorry about that.
That's all right, Paul. I think we'll leave it there because your line keeps coming in and out. Thank you so much for talking to us. That's Paul Baines. He's a professor of political marketing at the University of Leicester. Well, let's take a quick look at what you've been saying so far. Now, Paul, in response to the question whether you think Boris Johnson is an asset or a liability, Paul says he still has a connection with voters. Remember, people called him Boris. Other prime ministers and leaders of the opposition are called by their surnames. Yeah, nobody calls Keir Starmer Keir, do they? They just say... They
call him boring.
Yeah. Or Captain Hindsight, even. Yeah. That's a good one for him. Brian says 100% a liability to the whole UK. No world leader can trust his word. Vaughan says, Nana, Boris is an asset. I'm sick of all this harassment he's having to endure. He loves our country and is doing a great job. Well, keep your thoughts coming. It's all great. We're going to be discussing that in just a moment time. I'm asking you, is Boris Johnson an asset or a liability? You're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GBNews on TV, online and on digital radio. We'll continue with that great British debate, asking the very question whether you think he's an asset or a liability. And you'll hear the thoughts from my panel, Andrew Pearce from the Daily Mail and former Liberal Democrat MP, Lembit Opik. After 5 o'clock, make sure you stay tuned for the full 2 hours of the show. It'll be time for Outside. And today, we'll be going outside of gangs. Errol Lawson from Birmingham used to be part of a criminal gang. He's now a pastor and an author. He helps people avoid going down the same path he went down, a life of crime. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. The top stories on GB News. The Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries is calling for a formal investigation into the violent scenes at the Champions League final in Paris last night between Liverpool and Real Madrid. The government's investigating what UK police say was the worst violence seen at a European football match. UEFA says thousands of fans tried to enter the grounds with fake tickets. President Zelensky has visited troops on the front lines in the northeast of Ukraine today. The visit marks his first official appearance outside the capital since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in February. Ukraine's military say their forces are continuing to resist Russia's assault in the east of the country. Officials say Severodonetsk, the largest city they still hold in the Donbass region, was weathering heavy artillery barrages today. In the States, President Joe Biden and his wife Jill are in Texas today to pay their respects to the families of those killed in Tuesday's mass school shooting. 19 primary-age children and 2 of their teachers were murdered by a gunman at Robb Elementary School in the town of Uvalde. It's the 3rd mass shooting in the US in the last few weeks. Vice President Kamala Harris says America should have the courage to take action. And tributes are pouring in for the legendary jockey Lester Piggott, who's died at the age of 86. The 11-time champion and winner of 30 classics was widely regarded as one of the greatest riders of all time. Fellow jockey Frankie Dettori says Lester was a hero and the impact he made on racing was second to none. The chief executive of Great British Racing, Rod Street, added Lester was a true titan of the sport who transcended horse racing. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News and we're here in a moment with more. Nana Akua.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon. If you've just tuned in, where have you been? This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. Now, we return to our Great British debate this hour, and I'm asking, is Boris Johnson an asset or a liability? Now, we've just heard from Professor Paul Baines that Boris has had a turbulent few months, well, a few years, frankly. I mean, I don't think any other Prime Minister's been through the kind of thing he's been through. We've had a pandemic, we've had all sorts of things going on. Many calls, though, are there for him to resign over Partygate. Now, the Sue Gray report was published. He apologised and went out of his way to explain why he believed he hadn't knowingly misled the Commons in his previous accounts of what happened. So let's see what my panel make of that. I'm joined by consultant editor for the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce, and also former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik. Right, Lembit, I'll come to you now. So, what do you think? Boris Johnson, he's had a very turbulent few years. Is he an asset or a liability?
Well, first of all, I'm more cautious now because I've probably been more confident about the fact he wouldn't be in office anymore than anybody else on GB News. I was wrong.
I remember that.
He is the unsinkable Boris Johnson, and you've got to credit him for that, because I lost my seat for far less than what he's done. Two parts to the questioning: what will happen, what should happen. The first one's easier. What will happen is the Conservative Party, which is the greatest political electoral machine on the planet, will simply work out if he's going to be an asset or not. He wasn't an asset in the local elections, but it was less bad than I expected. Two by-elections coming up, one which the Lib Dems will probably win, one which Labour will probably win. That's when it begins to get tricky, because all of those Tories in the north will go, are we going to hold our seats? If they don't, then the Tories could actually let Keir Starmer in. The other thing, of course, as you know, is I've got very low opinion of Keir Starmer. If Tony Blair had been leader of the opposition, Boris would have been out when I predicted it. But Starmer's now in exactly the same mess, and a hypocrite, because he looks like he's done the same things he's called Boris to resign for. What should happen? It's the big stuff, actually. OK, he's hiding behind the war to an extent and looking good there. But It's an idiotic environmental policy which I'd never expected the Tories to have. Do the voting public know that the Tories are going to tell you can't buy a petrol engine car after 2030? It's just insane. Then you've got the cost of living crisis, again connected with insane energy policies. Those are getting us down the pan at the moment as a country. And in terms of the serious politics, that's where I think he's going wrong.
So an asset or liability?
He's a liability, I think.
You think he's a liability, Andrew?
I think he's still an asset. I think there's no doubt he's had a very bad time, but it's mid-term. The Tories have been in power for 12 years. Lembit's right, those local election results weren't as bad as they could have been. And in fact, when you go out of London, they were pretty bad for Labour, which only gained a few seats. I think he can turn it round. I think he's got a problem, though, he's got a difficult relationship with the truth, putting it mildly. And that is becoming an issue for voters, and people say openly he's a fibber, he's a liar, he's dissembling. And he's not out of the woods on Partygate, even though I thought Sue Gray's report didn't really land a blow on him. The interim report said what the report said last week, that there was a failure of the culture of leadership in Downing Street, which enabled all those parties. But there's going to be an investigation into whether he misled the Commons, chaired by Harriet Harman. It's going to be an all-party committee. There's a Tory majority on that committee, but when you look at the Tories on that committee, they're not particularly friendly to Boris Johnson. Just imagine if they conclude he did mislead the Commons, there'll then be a vote and he could potentially be suspended, and then that's all over for him. But he's got to prevent that committee, in my view, making that view that he misled Parliament. Now, he simply says he got fined £50. When we've seen the photograph of that party, why was he fined for that? Why was he fined for that? Why was the Chancellor? I thought that the incident which was more damaging, which he wasn't fined for, was the leaving do for Lee Kane, where he's drinking, he made a speech and he's there for 10 or 15 minutes. But look, he is where he is, he accepted the fine, so technically Lembit will argue he's misled the Commons because he said there were no parties.
I would argue, and to me that's the big thing. By the way, I like Boris as a person. None of this is party political. I don't do that anymore. But from a professional point of view, there's a big issue here. Because it's really clear, if you mislead Parliament deliberately as a minister, you've got to go. But instead, he's trying to rewrite that code. Andrew and I were talking about this before. The really smart thing, if Keir Starmer can do anything smart about this, is call that vote, because then the Tories, with marginal votes, majorities in the north of England, would have to vote to change the rules, quite obviously to protect Boris Johnson. And as you say, Andrew, the public just don't like that. They don't like hypocrisy. That's where he can go wrong. Millions of people, like you've suggested, don't really care. But enough people do in those marginal seats to cost him his majority.
Because the suggestion is that this change was already underway and that the Standards and Privileges Committee was looking at this anyway. I think it's ridiculous that they're going to change the rules, actually. And the thing is, Boris Johnson will not resign. He'll have to be dragged screaming and shouting out of Number 10 Downing Street, because that's the way it is with all leaders. And there's no way he's going to resign. The normal rules of engagement don't apply to him. He's a big figure, a big hitter. I've seen him out on the road campaigning. People love Boris Johnson. They like to see him, they want to touch him, they want to have their kids photographed with him. Keir Starmer hasn't got a tenth of his charisma. And when he turns it on, it's amazing. And I still think when he gets through this, and if the cost of living package cuts through to voters and they believe in him, I think he'll be back on top of the polls.
It's interesting, though, that a lot of the political parties you would expect, so, for example, the Labour Party and also Liberal Democrats, you would think that they would want him to stay. Because if they viewed him as a liability, then they're better off...
I think they know he's an asset.
Yeah, well,
but that's why they're doing it. They know he's an asset, so they're trying to get rid of him. So that's what I'm saying is a reverse psychology.
I take a slightly different view. But having been in politics for decades, every conspiracy seems to fail. It's cock-up most of the time. The fact that Keir Starmer, who hubristically said that Boris Johnson should resign for just being investigated, means that Keir Starmer should resign. Do we see him stepping down? No. This tortured change in his position. I honestly think that they don't think about it as deeply as we've just discussed it. They just think they can get that scalp, which is probably, in my view, actually bad for Labour, because then all of Boris's baggage goes, and maybe someone like Liz Truss, who I have a huge respect for, by the way, and actually Rishi might be in the frame as well still. They could rebuild it. But let's get back to the starting point. The Tories will do what's right for the Tories. They do. It doesn't really matter what we say here. The public, if they don't vote well in the 2 by-elections, more pressure on Boris.
But even Keir Starmer lied. Keir Starmer lied, 4 times or so about Beergate. He lied about that. And then when there was the press conference, which he was going to talk about about it. He then did a Joe Biden and chose who would answer. He said, we'll start with you, Beth. We've agreed that, you know. So he's not even a truth teller either. And in fact, if we look at the entire political spectrum, it doesn't look like there are many people telling the truth in it at all.
And apparently the fact that they said Angela Rayner wasn't in the Durham Gate party was a genuine mistake. So they can make a genuine mistake about the presence of the deputy of the Labour Party in a room with 15 other people, but Boris Johnson can't make a genuine mistake. And also, Keir Starmer has to tell us, it was 5 people in that room to begin with, then it went up to 10, now it's 15.
Yeah.
It'll probably be even higher. After those 2 by-elections, though, the Tories will lose them, and I think Tory MPs will factor in the fact that the one in Wakefield's caused by the Tory MP being banged up in prison for abusing a minor, and the other one in Devon, they're going to lose that because the ghastly Tory MP was looking at porn in the Commons chamber. Lembit Opik had a very colourful time as a politician. I don't think he'd even contemplate doing that in the Commons chamber or in public. So they're going to lose both of those seats for those very special reasons.
And it's the behaviour of a lot of the politicians. It's not just Boris, but they're all landing on his head as though he's the reason. When I actually think he's one of the only reasons why they have a potential chance of winning without him. I don't know if they're thinking... I heard people talking Jeremy Hunt, which he was not popular.
Lando.
He was not popular. He also wanted to remain. So what happens to Brexit?
Well, I would say that Boris has helped a little bit, as we've implied, because there isn't really much else on the frame. I do think Liz Truss is a very serious contender. I'm very impressed with her at personal level. And Sunak seems to have repaired his problems from earlier on in the year. Well, maybe not.
After appearing in the On the Riches.
Sunday Times Riches finished him off.
Maybe. But still, the bottom line here is that we need to recognise if Starmer had been able to dispatch Boris, he would have done it, whether it's good for Labour or not. He just couldn't do it. And the moment's passed. Now it's in the hands of the public. And maybe you're right. All 3 of us know that probably the Lib Dems will win in one and Labour will win in the other. So maybe it's a foregone conclusion. If I was a Tory party manager now, I'd be telling everybody that's what's going to happen. I'd say, yeah, well, we've taken a beating, mid-term, learned the lessons, and Boris is terribly, terribly sorry. Can we please move on? And as you've said yourself, Nana, I accept, millions of people don't give tuppence about this because they've all had parties during lockdown. They know why it happens. They all think he lied, but they did it themselves. Where I live in Epsom, people around, they were all having parties all through the lockdown. So maybe the public's forgiving because they did it themselves.
They also know that there was rather special circumstances for the Prime Minister. He lives in that building.
Exactly.
So when he comes in from the day, and with his backdrop, he goes into the cabinet room, his wife's thrown a surprise party, he was there for 9 minutes, no alcohol consumed, by the way. The cake doesn't even come out of the Tupperware. Then he goes back to the flat. I think it's like people cut him a bit of slack because of that.
Exactly. And also Downing Street is a different building. I mean, a lot of people don't realise how big it is.
Well, there's 100 rooms in it.
Well, exactly. It's not. It's 4 buildings, isn't it? 4 huge buildings, and there's loads of
400 staff working there at any one time.
No, I think Boris is guilty. I just think most people don't really care.
Yeah.
My biggest concern, it's not really about that, and maybe I haven't nuanced that before. The fact is, if you're going to change the code to protect himself, then things get very, very uncomfortable.
Well, to be honest, if I was the boss and I could change the code and stop people from firing me, I would. Who wouldn't? But this shows
Who's going to fire you?
Exactly.
Who's going to fire you?
Well, not without a good reason, but yeah, it could happen. Listen, this show's nothing without you and your views. Let's welcome our great British voice, your opportunity to be on the show. Tell us what you really think about the topics we're discussing. Right, where should we go? Let's go to Liverpool. Let's have a chat with Henry Davis. He's the author of The Truth About Property. Henry, what do you think about Boris? Is he a liability? Is he an asset?
Hello, Nana. Well, you know what? I agree with a lot of what Lembit says, right? In my life, from my perspective, people do business with people that they like. And Boris is a likeable guy. He's got a bit of charisma. Let's compare him to the Labour leader, who's an absolute robot, who just doesn't come across well, zero personality. And I'm not even being mean, but he just doesn't, he's not a people person. So let's have a look at politics. Politics is all about lying, right? Because if you told the truth and told people that there isn't an endless pile of cash, they would not vote for you. So to get elected, you have to tell lies. That's the culture of our system. And anybody who believes any different is fooling themselves.
Henry, it's been great to talk to you. Thank you so much. Good to hear your view. That's Henry Davis. He's the author of The Truth About Property. He's there in Liverpool. Crikey. So that's what he thinks. Keep your thoughts coming. Well, that's what Henry said. He's told us
the truth about not just property, about Keir Starmer. He's a robot. He's boring, grey. He's meant to be a brilliant lawyer. Well, I've not seen any forensic skills
unbelievable.
at the dispatch
How
box.
could he have run the CPS?
Yeah.
Honestly.
And not such a good job either, I won't mention.
There's lots of things.
Oh, yeah, well, we can talk about that. Maybe not on air right now.
No, the Labour have got a long history of electing dud leaders and sticking by them.
Yes, exactly.
The Tory parties, if the leader, as Lembit says, if the leader becomes a liability, he's out.
Yeah.
But the problem is they haven't got anybody else who would really fit that bill of getting the...
Put some money on the Education Secretary. Madeleine Zahawi.
Oh, no, yeah.
Inside track, a very senior Conservative told me at the beginning of this week that they've internally said, we're going to give Boris 6 months. If he can turn it around, that's OK. So the long stop for him is 6 months. And the by-elections probably won't do it, but they'll make people edgy. If he still hasn't turned the polls around then, they'll have a quiet chat. The 1922 committee will say, time to move on.
I think he should call the vote of no confidence and get them to get on with it, get it out of the way, because this drip effect...
He would win it.
He would win it. That's why he should do it, because they can't do it again for a year or so.
Even she won.
Yeah, even she won. Yeah. Anyone can win. Yeah. Well, let's see. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Let's take a look. Johnny says, Boris is awful. Are we really going to sit back and let the buffoon destroy our country? Carol says Boris was an asset before the election, but has spent too much time pandering to the woke left press and forgetting to address the issues that matter to Conservative voters. Yeah, I hear you, but if you say that and you don't vote for him, then the woke left will be in charge, so watch out. Sarah says, I'm backing Boris against the coup. Yeah, well, I can't say where I would go, but at the moment...
we do know where you would go.
Well, I don't really, because at the moment none of them are any good, but there is one that's slightly better than the others.
And do you think it might be Boris?
I'm not going to say it. It's pretty obvious. Well, let's see what you think. There's a poll up right now on Twitter throughout the show. I've been asking you, is Boris an asset or a liability? I'm going to ask my panel, what do you reckon the numbers are?
I think he'll be 63. 37.
For against?
For him.
No, I'd say it's almost the opposite. 60-40 against, that's my guess.
Let's have a look then, let's see. Currently, 53% of you say he's an asset, 47% say liability. A bit like Brexit, this. We're heading close to the Brexit vote. Right, well, keep your thoughts coming. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. After the break, it's World View, and we'll be discussing the latest developments in Ukraine. Russia's ambassador in Britain does not believe his country will use tactical nuclear weapons in the war against Ukraine. And the Ukrainian President Zelensky is hoping for more support from the West. Also in World View, we'll be talking guns in America. See you in a few moments.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. And now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
If you just joined us, where on earth have you been? This is GB News. I'm Nana Akua. You can't miss us. We're on TV, online and on digital radio. You can even find us on YouTube and watch the show live, and also watch everything back on our app. But it's now time to take a look at the big stories coming in from across the world and see how they affect us here in the UK in World View. We're going to look at the gun laws in the States after the horrendous shooting in a primary school where 19 children were killed. And we also head over to Ukraine, where Russia appears to be gaining ground. Joining me in the studio to tell us more is journalist Sam Ashworth-Hayes. Sam, let's start with Ukraine, because it's gone slightly quiet, you know, as in, and I'm worried. It's like when my child is playing quietly and I don't hear him for a while, I'm thinking, what are you doing, Ivory? So what's going on in Ukraine at the moment?
So at the start of this conflict, you have Russia making these quite rapid gains on the ground. They sort of push towards Kiev, and then the advance stalls.
Yeah.
Ukraine has a successful counterattack, and Russia refocuses its efforts onto the east, onto the Donbass region.
And that was all around along the coastal area to try and
exactly
cut off...
down the coast towards Crimea and in the very east of the country.
And Odessa and all that.
Exactly. And it's having considerably more success with this more limited goal. It's been able to concentrate its forces, it's changed its tactics, the logistics are better.
Yeah.
We're now seeing this process of these very slow sort of grinding advances being made on the ground.
So, I mean, OK, but they're making advances on the ground, so they're encroaching further into Ukraine territory now.
Yes.
How successful are the Russians being on this, then?
So it's interesting because they've changed up their tactics quite considerably. They're using much more in the way of artillery. They're sort of forming small encirclements rather than going for big sort of sweeping moves. And they're sort of just grinding out these very small advances day by day into the Donbass. And it does look like they're having some success in their new stated goal, which is to retake this region entirely.
And so you think, what is the aim then, in your view, what they're trying to do? Are Russia really trying to take over all of Ukraine? It seems to me that they're not going to stop, are they? It doesn't look like it.
Well, their stated goal at the moment is to take Donetsk, Luhansk, and sort of link up the east of the country with the Crimea, which they already hold. For now, that seems to be their stated ambition, and that's, I think, what you should sort of look at their short-term objective being. In the longer term, absolutely.
And there was talk about nuclear weapons and things like that. Was it the Russian minister saying they're not going to use nuclear weapons, they're not likely to use tactical nuclear weapons?
I would be extremely surprised if they did. I don't see any reason to do so.
Yeah.
I mean, they're having success with conventional forces, and the use of tactical nuclear weapons within Europe would be such an escalation that it would just be completely counterproductive.
And Zelensky, he's asking for more support and more weapons from the West.
So Zelensky's doing exactly what his job is, which is to keep drumming up support, to keep asking for more weaponry, and to keep this in the forefront of politicians and the public's mind. Because there is a sort of real misalignment of incentives between Ukraine and its Western backers. For us, this is a fantastic way to spend money quite efficiently, degrading Russian military capacity and sort of making Europe more secure.
Right.
For them, it's a fight for national survival. So his job is basically to keep this public support for Ukraine high as the cost of living takes over and sort of people start to think, well, maybe we should be spending this money elsewhere, or we shouldn't be sort of disrupting supply chains in this way. His job is to keep the public in the West backing Ukraine so this flood of weapons keeps coming in.
There was talk as well about there being a passage so that we can actually get the grain out of Ukraine and make a secure crossing through the sea to get the supplies out there. Is that still going on? Are they still discussing that? Is that a reality?
I'm not sure, to be completely honest, if that's something that's plausible. I think something which is very interesting, though, is looking at Europe's absolute struggle sort of weaning itself off Russian energy. You've had this, we've been talking a lot about the amount we're sending to Ukraine. I think at one point last month, the EU had sent something about $1 billion in weaponry. It had sent $35 billion to Russia in terms of buying Russian energy, and it's just completely incapable of shutting off Russian gas. That's no longer on the table. They're sort of talking about a fuel oil embargo, but Hungary and other countries which are very reliant on this are saying, well, we can't do that either. So there's this really strange scenario where almost funding both sides of this conflict because of our economic dependency on Russia.
Yeah, well, we're learning a lesson right there. Don't rely so heavily on another country for your own energy requirements. Let's go across the pond, because I'm joined now by Paul Duddridge. He's the host of the Politics People podcast. Paul, welcome to the programme. Good to talk to you. Now, yesterday we spoke a little bit. I want to know, what's the mood like in America? Because we've had Kamala Harris now speaking up against assault weapons, which is something that I was thinking that perhaps America could ban. I didn't quite get the terminology right for those. Is there an appetite for that? What's the mood like?
I don't know if you got the terminology wrong. I just think it's the current. It is the current terminology, and it's incorrect. But I don't think you were wrong. Kamala Harris is definitely now calling for a ban on the assault rifles. The mood here might have been different had that terrible Uvalde story not developed in the way it has. And again, this is so difficult, and I don't want to sound flippant or crass about this or try and exploit the horror that took place this week. But the narrative has changed from the initial reporting of the story that ban assault rifles, ban assault weapons. It's now changed to understanding that the cops, for whatever reason, acknowledged by the sheriff locally, waited an hour before entering the building. And so any opportunity that gun banning lobbies might have exploited has actually kind of dissipated. So this has just gone back to Washington politics seeking a ban on these assault rifles. And again, when you start getting into the actual detail of what is an assault rifle, it's going to be almost impossible to make that happen.
Right, so it's almost they're just talking, but Kamala Harris is sounding tough, but it's not likely that is actually a reality at all. I mean, it's frightening to think that America may never. I mean, there's got to do something about it. Will the laws around gun controls ever change, in your view, then?
No, absolutely not. The fact is, the Second Amendment to the Constitution is very, very specific about being a well-armed militia. And when that was drafted, this is in the DNA of the United States. And as an outsider becoming a citizen here, you really do find that even people that you consider to be on the left will be gun owners. It's very, very... The Second Amendment, uniquely, we think of perhaps weapons would be used just for defense in a kind of burglary situation against another citizen trying to take our stuff. When that Second Amendment was drafted, the tone was we never wanted tyrannical government being able to take over again. We are anti-tyrannical government. That's when this Second Amendment was drafted. And that, to my observation, is in the DNA of the United States. They are very, very, we might vote left and right governments, but innately the US citizen, it's still
wants to
present
have guns
with every citizen that they value the individual above the state.
Well, listen, Paul, I hope they sort out those gun laws, but it doesn't sound like they will reform them in any way. Paul Duddridge, thank you so much for talking to us. That, of course, is Worldview. Thank you so much to Sam Ashworth-Haynes as well. He's talking about Ukraine. Good to talk to him. Right, you're with me. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News. More to come in the next hour. So it's just gone 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. For the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. On the way, we'll be meeting Errol from outside. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. Good afternoon. The top stories. The Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries is calling for a formal investigation into the violent scenes at the Champions League final in Paris last night between Liverpool and Real Madrid. The government's investigating what UK police say was the worst violent scene at a European football match. UEFA says thousands of fans tried to enter the grounds with fake tickets. But the Liverpool defender Andy Robertson has criticised French police's handling of the event. In other news today, President Joe Biden and his wife Jill are in Texas today to pay their respects to the families of those killed in Tuesday's mass shooting. 19 primary school children and 2 of their teachers were murdered by a gunman at Robb Elementary School in the town of Uvalde. It's the 3rd mass shooting in the US in the last few weeks. Vice President Kamala Harris says America should have the courage to take action.
We are not sitting around waiting to figure out what the solution looks like. You know, we're not looking for a vaccine. We know what works on this. It includes, let's have an assault weapons ban. You know what an assault weapon is? You know how an assault weapon was designed? It was designed for a specific purpose, to kill a lot of human beings quickly.
Ukraine's President Zelensky has visited troops on the front lines in the northeast of the country today. The visit marks his first official appearance outside of the Kyiv region since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February. Ukraine's military say their forces are continuing to resist Russia's assault in the east of the country. Officials say Severodonetsk, the largest city they still hold in the Donbass region, was weathering heavy artillery barrages today. Here, environmental campaigners have deflated the tyres of 20 4x4 cars in Edinburgh as part of their campaign to deter people from driving vehicles into cities. The group has been deflating the tyres of SUVs across the UK, with one member estimating they've targeted around 4,000 this year. A spokesperson for Edinburgh Tyre Extinguishers says 4x4s are unnecessary and are massive killer vehicles. But Police Scotland have called their actions reckless and urged drivers to check their tyres before driving. The Labour Party is to push for a vote on the Prime Minister's decision to change the ministerial code of conduct. Critics say Boris Johnson's proposals watered down the rules, but the Cabinet Office says it's disproportionate for ministers to potentially lose their job for what might have been a minor breach. The changes mean they'll instead face a salary suspension or will need to issue a public apology. As the UK prepares to celebrate Her Majesty's Jubilee, the Prime Minister says no monarch has served the country so well. In a personal message to the Queen, Boris Johnson thanked her for her exemplary service, praising the institution of the Crown and the exceptional individual who wears it. The Prime Minister also described the Queen as a steadying, guiding force for the nation, adding, Her Majesty embodied the very idea of what a constitutional monarchy should be. And lastly, tributes have been pouring in for the legendary horse jockey Lester Piggott, who's died at the age of 86.
Never say die was that 18-year-old marvel of the saddle, Lester Piggott.
As I was saying, the 11-time champion and winner of 30 classics was widely regarded as one of the greatest riders of all time. Fellow jockey Frankie Dettori said Lester was a hero and the impact he'd made on racing was second to none. Willie Carson, who rode alongside Piggott in the 70s and 80s, said he felt as if he'd lost a part of his life. You're up to date on GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Nana Akua.
So good afternoon. This is coming up to 5 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. For the next hour, me and my panel will be taking on some of the big topics that are hitting the headlines right now. I'm Nana Akua, and this show is all about opinion. It's mine, it's theirs, and of course, it's yours. We'll be debating, discussing, and at times we will disagree, but no one will be cancelled. So joining me today, it's former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik and consulting editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce. Still to come, each Sunday at 5 o'clock, I'm joined by a celebrity, a former MP or someone who's had an extremely interesting career, to take a look at life after the job. We'll talk highs, lows and lessons learned and what comes next on the outside. And today I'll be speaking to a former gang member turned pastor, Errol Lawson. He managed to turn his life around to become a successful author and an entrepreneur after dealing drugs at the age from 13. And in the Great British Debate this hour, I'm asking, has furlough made the British public lazy? Redundancy is now at a record low of just 70,000 people losing their jobs between January and March this year. I'll ask if the increase in job security and working from home has made the country complacent and lazy. We'll also discuss whether more people getting married is better for society. Recent figures from the Office of National Statistics show that the number of people getting married is at its lowest rate since records began in 1862. I'll speak to divorce coach Sarah Davidson to find out why less of us are deciding to tie the knot. As ever, you can get in touch via email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or tweet us at gbnews. Right, so joining me next is a man who turned his life around. It is, of course, time for Outside. After being left homeless at the age of just 16 when his mother kicked him out for drug dealing, Errol Lawson used to spend his time on the streets, hanging around with gangsters and criminals. But against all odds, he turned his life around to become one of the best-selling authors of 3 books, a business owner and a pastor. It is, of course, time for Outside, and joining me is Errol. Errol, thank you so much for talking to us and joining us. Wow, I mean, what a colourful life you've had.
Hi, thank you for having me.
It's great, and what fabulous teeth as well. Oh, mine are nothing like that. Mine actually look yellow compared to yours. So talk to me about your upbringing and where were you born? Talk to me all about that.
Yeah, so born and raised in Birmingham, inner city Birmingham, where I lived with mum and dad. I went to a primary school called St Mary's Primary School, right in the heart of inner city Birmingham. And age 11 in year 6, I was the only boy to pass their 11 plus. So you can imagine my parents were chuffed. It was a phenomenon. I wasn't so excited. My friends were all going to other comprehensive schools in the inner city. Dad said, son, you're going to Bishop Vesey's grammar school, whether you like it or not. And he bought me these really pointy shoes that I had to wear to fit in. He said, let me move house to be closer to my new school. And then my parents divorced. And so as an 11-year-old kid, my dad was my hero. And him leaving the family home was an emotional turmoil began for me. I didn't know why dad had gone, where he had gone, what was going on, no answers. And my reaction was to rebel. And that I did. I began to just find myself around the wrong crowd. I just remember walking down this road called Carter Road, saying to myself distinctly, I don't care anymore. Forget this, forget life. I made up my mind that I was going to do my own thing. And age 13, started smoking weed and selling weed and things of that nature. And life started going downhill. Long after that, around age 13 again, I get a letter from my dad in the post one day saying to me, son, I'm sorry, son, I've made some bad choices and I'm in prison. That was the first time. I was 13. And a few months later, my uncle came to collect me and take me down to visit my dad in HMP Wormwood Scrubs. And never forget it, 13 years old. I was crying my eyes out, but I wanted to see him. And it changed my life. Again, I came back to Birmingham that day with a story that my dad was in prison. And for my friends, that gave me status, it gave me reputation, it gave me this extra kudos. And I continued in that pathway of going downhill, doing my own thing, just crime, gangs, you name it. And it came to a head again about age 16 in year 11 in school. I managed to stay in school somehow, several run-ins with the police here and there. And at 16, one day before school, there was a knock at the front door, and I was the closest to the door, so I opened the door, and there were 2 big burly men standing there wearing their grey suits, and they ask, is Errol Lawson here? I'm Errol Lawson, can I help you? Errol Lawson, you're under arrest, they say. It's the police at my front door, now in my hallway. I'm like, who are you for real? They put handcuffs on. They show me their badges, Sergeant so-and-so. They take me away, and I remember my mom and my siblings there watching me being taken to the back of a police car. If you can imagine, in my family, my nan had this boast that none of her kids have ever been in trouble with the police before, and I'm being taken away. The next day, my mom sits me down. She says to me, son, I love you. I mean, she's working like 3 jobs to keep the house going, to keep food on the table. And she says to me, son, I love you, but I can't do this anymore. So you're going to have to move out now, find your own way, do your own thing. And I was made homeless at 16 years old. And I lived in a hostel in a place called Lazelle's in Birmingham. I moved around about 12 times between the ages of 16 and 19, constantly moving around, nowhere to go, no vision, no hope. If you'd have seen me at 16 years old, you'd have thought to yourself, this kid is not going to make it. There's no hope for him. It's not possible, but by the grace of God, you know, I'm here today. In fact, I go back to my old schools now, and I do training for staff and workshops for students, and my old teacher's still there, and they're like, how on earth have you come back here, Errol, to be doing this? And my life has completely changed. It wasn't quick. Around age 19, I had what you might call a date with destiny. I found myself standing in front of a judge in Birmingham Magistrates Court, and I was being sentenced. And the judge who was there across from me, wearing his grey wig and me in my grey suit to try and impress him. And he says to me, hey, Mr. Lawson, you're not going to prison today, but you are going to do 100 hours of community service. I breathed a sigh of relief. What that meant was that every Friday for 100 hours, I go to a place in Handsworth called Law, Leisure and Learning, owned by an old Irishman called John Holcroft. John was just an amazing man, amazing community man, passionate, fiery character. No one messed with John, you know. And John said to me, you know, Errol, you're different, kiddo. Errol, I believe in you, he'd say to me. That was his mantra, I believe in you, come on. Long story short, John ended up becoming a father figure to me. Literally, like the dad I never had. And he just saw past my behavior, my mindset, my attitude. And he'd take me into council meetings, Nana. He'd show me things I'd never imagined seeing. I'd be sat next to him in boardrooms and be saying to myself, is this all it takes? Is this all it is? I can do this, you know? And with this help, I started my first company at 19 years old, and my life began to turn around. And it's from then onwards, you know, I found Christ, became a Christian, then became a youth pastor at a local church, and then became a pastor of a church, now leading a congregation of people. And I speak all around the UK. I'm best-selling author, 4 books.
Well, I
get to train in some of the most amazing places. And God has been so good. So good.
I can see you're definitely a talker. It's so good to hear the story, though. You tell a great story. I was mesmerised. It's amazing, isn't it? So throughout, like, some of the hardest times that you had, especially between the divorce, because it's interesting, because later on in the show we're talking about whether marriage and being married is actually a better thing for society. So it was really that divorce and that set things off for you on this sort of path. In your view, would you say that if your parents had stuck together that you probably wouldn't have travelled this path?
Interestingly, right, I had friends who had gone through similar situations and didn't fall off as far as I did because there was another father figure or granddad, uncle, someone else in their lives maybe that was able to offer that affirmation, that support, that encouragement to be there on the touchline when they had their football matches, you know. And I think it's critical. It's critical. Fatherlessness is a sad epidemic today in our society, and we know that we look at the prison population, for example. Many of those young men in prison today have been in fatherless situations. So undoubtedly, marriage as an institution, I think, is a bedrock in our society. And had I had mum and dad at home, my chance would have been I would have been much better off, 100%.
And you got involved in gangs, obviously, and I suspect to have that family unit feeling, because that's what they say. A lot of young men get involved in gangs, so it feels like they're one of the lads. And even some of the things you said, it sounded like you wanted a sense of belonging. How difficult was it to get out, though?
I had no alternative now, and this is the reality for a lot of people. People ask me, Errol, well, would I change it? Would I have done it differently? At that stage in my life, there was no other option than to find a group of people, not even say find, I grew up with them, so was to belong to, connect with, be a part of a group of people that I could find safety, protection, love in a weird way, right? Acceptance, cover, you know. So critical, right? Getting out of it wasn't so much about, like, it wasn't like a tussle to get out. It was a set of circumstances that brought me to a place where people offered me opportunities that I would not otherwise have. There was nowhere else to turn, but John came into my life and I made the decision. If you imagine this scenario, there are 3 of us standing outside John's building one day, and we're all there smoking our spliffs, all involved or connected to gangs at least. And he asked us, says, hey lads, I want to start a football team from this building, he says. I'll give you the kit, the league fees, the minibus. Any of you guys interested? We looked at him, took another drag on our spliffs, said, nah, you're all right, mate, forget that. For some reason, at the end of the day, I went back to John and I said, John, tell me more about that football thing you said earlier. I had nothing else to do. I love playing football. He said, yes, Errol, I'll give you the kits, the nets, the league fees, the minibus, whatever you need, kid. I want to start a team. What are you saying? I said, all right, I'll give it a go. And I started this team and all the players were gang members. I mean, hardcore gang members. And for about 6-9 months, I ran this Sunday football team. It was crazy. Fights with other teams, fights amongst our own players. Some days 6-8 players showing up. It was crazy. My first ever leadership experience. But it was being around that John character, and seeing the impact of someone like John in my own life, that what made me want to be a John for thousands of other young people and leaders and individuals around the world. Knowing that one person, that one voice in your life, if you choose to hear that voice, can make a huge impact. And so getting out I was given a lifeline in many ways by John, and I chose to stick with him. I chose to believe what he said about me and my potential. And when I started to do the projects and the businesses that I started to do, my friends weren't interested, to be honest, because it meant coming into the light somewhat. It meant coming into the public space, because I was doing things for young people and projects and stuff. And I'd say, yo, lads, come and help me out. Come and do this, come and do that. And they weren't interested. And so the relationships just...
Well, you've written some books, and you're an author. You've written some books. Briefly tell us what they're called, and if people are interested and want to find out more about you.
Yeah, brilliant. So my first one's called From the Postcode to the Globe, How to Overcome Limitations and Realize Your Potential. A postcode is a small place, a confined, limited place. A globe represents possibility. So this is a great book for young people, those that work with them, who inspire you. My second one's called Teenpreneur, How to Build a Business in Your Teens. If you have a young person in your life who has entrepreneurial traits, I did it at 19. I've seen kids all around the world now reading this book and are beginning to do the same thing. And my third one's called The 5 Core Abilities of Highly Effective Leaders. But Nana, listen, I love to speak, as you can tell. I love to go into organizations and go into schools, speak to young people. My website is there. It's called Emerge Leadership, emerge-leadership.com. You can also find me as part of the Art of Being Brilliant team of trainers and speakers. We speak all across the country in all kinds of public and private sector organizations, inspiring individuals and teams just to flourish and to be the best they can be.
Well, Errol, be the best you can be. I love that. We'll leave it there. It's really good to talk to you. Thank you very much for all that.
Thank you, Nana. I really appreciate it. God bless.
Good luck with everything. Thank you so much. That's Errol Lawson. He's a pastor, an author, and an entrepreneur. Well, that was outside. But right now, on the way, the great British debate this hour, I'm asking, has furlough made the British public lazy? The pandemic saw much of the UK's workforce given the opportunity to stay at home and earn cash for doing pretty much nothing. So I want to find out if this, combined with the record low redundancies, has led to the UK losing its work ethic. But first, it's the weather.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking showery at first, although with showers fading away to leave clear spells. Let's take a look at those details. For Devon and Cornwall, a mixture of showers and sunny spells. The showers will still be on the heavy side at first, but will die away through the evening. For London, the evening is looking largely dry with some sunny spells, although the risk of a few showers remains. For Cardiff and South Wales, a few showers are likely this evening, but for many it will be dry with some sunny spells. It's a similar story across Birmingham and the Midlands, where the evening promises to give a scattering of mainly light showers with variable amounts of cloud and some sunny spells. A cloudier picture across parts of north-east England this evening, with a few spots of rain and some bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool along the east coast with wind off the sea. Rather cloudy at times for Edinburgh and southern Scotland, with a few showery outbreaks, but also with bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool, especially towards the east or under thicker cloud. And for Northern Ireland, the evening will see a familiar mix of sunny spells and a few scattered light showers, perhaps a touch breezy along the north coast. A dry night for most away from Scotland, cloudier in the north and turning chilly in the south under clear skies. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere.
We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
with honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Good afternoon. If you've just joined me, where have you been? It's just fast approaching 24 minutes after 5 o'clock. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. I'm Nana Akua. It's time now for our Great British Debate this hour, and I'm asking, has furlough made the British public lazy? Redundancies in the UK have reached a record low, with just 70,000 people losing their jobs from January to March. And that is down from 54% on the same period last year. And there's been concern that the increase in job security has led to people getting complacent and no longer wanting to work hard. So with the furlough system and increased home working, I want to ask if the British public are becoming lazy. I'm joined now by David Maddox. He's a political editor of the Express Online. David, straight to the point, do you think the British public have become pretty lazy?
I'm tempted to say yes, but no, I don't. I don't think much has changed in the mindset of the British public, even after 2 years of lockdown and furlough. I do think, though, that the big change is that people don't want to come into work anymore, that they want to work from home a lot more. And that actually is causing a huge amount of problems. I think in many cases it's a much less efficient way of working. Boris Johnson had a wonderful description of it the other day, didn't he? You know, people kind of wandering away from their computers and, you know, going and seeing what was in the fridge and so forth. And, you know, there's a lot more distractions at home and actually a lot less ability to kind of talk to your colleagues and get things done.
Only that, but some people aren't even where they're meant to be, are they? I mean, I've heard stories of people who are on the golf course and doing all sorts. I mean, if you've ever tried to ring the Department of Transport or the CMS or any of those organisations, somehow, I mean, you'll be on the phone for hours. I mean, do you think, though, because we've got record unemployment, as in literally we've got so many jobs that they're not even being filled by the British workforce, nobody seems to want to go to the jobs there, especially after they've all been furloughed. A lot of people have been furloughed and quite enjoyed the lifestyle.
I think there is some of that, actually. But you've got to remember that we've got record levels of actual employment in this country. And the unemployment level is historically very low. It still is, even after the last 2 years. It's true, there are an awful lot of vacancies. And actually, you know, perhaps more should be done to get those who are not working actually to go and fill some of those vacancies. But I mean, talk about the government departments. The work from home business is a very serious problem in the government departments. I was actually, just to give you a brief story on it, I was having lunch with some diplomats the other day who were complaining that they still are unable to have proper meetings with people in the Foreign Office because nobody's ever in the office. nobody's there in London. We're all back at their country homes somewhere on the old commuter belt. And it's really affected the way business is done, and actually the kind of private chats, the easy chats that kind of got business done quickly. And yeah, you're certainly right about people disappearing off to the golf course or walking the dog or whatever.
Interesting. So in your views then, do you think then, because you didn't say that you thought they were lazy, but you attempted to say that they are, it sounds like you've convinced yourself that they are actually quite lazy.
Everybody wants to have a good time every so often. It depends on your job. Some of us like our job a lot, and we'll do it round the clock. Some people less so, and can get easily distracted.
Well, David, thank you so much for talking to us. That's David Maddox. He's the political editor for The Express Online. I'm also joined now by sociologist and social commentator Frank Furedi. Well, is there, Frank, thank you for joining us. Is there an issue with people wanting employers to work for them rather than working hard for their company or organisation? Because it seems to have swapped around a bit.
It did. I think what's happened, and this was already clear before the pandemic, is that for a lot of people, work has become a lifestyle choice rather than something you do for a wage or for a salary. And I think a lot of the people, especially young people, drew the conclusion that work shouldn't just be about what they do, but also about what the employer is doing for them. And this just became intensified in the pandemic, particularly by the fact that a lot of people began to work out of home. And all of a sudden, what was a small lifestyle issue for a minority of the workforce became a much bigger one. And I think the tragedy is today is that people are losing sight of the fact that work isn't just a drag, isn't just something you do because you have to make a living. It also is an important way of socializing, meeting people, learning about life. And what I'm really worried about is that if people become immunized from this experience and switch off from work in the way that it's happening to a section of society, I think not just the economy, but a lot of people in the labor force are going to be in big trouble.
Do you think a lot of people are actually a little bit scared of hard graft as well? Because a lot of the jobs that if you can't work from home for, are pretty hard labour and intensive jobs that you can't do from your homes. And it does seem that people don't want to do those anymore.
I think that's been a problem for a while. I mean, we saw that very, very clearly in the countryside where people refuse to work on farms because it's hard physical labor. I think that has to some extent become much more prevalent in other sectors. But I have to say that there is a substantial number of people who are running our infrastructure, our railways, people who are working in factories and other places who work very, very hard. It's just that there is now a sizable and growing minority of individuals who regard that kind of work as somehow below them, and who also demand that if they are going to get a job, then it should be nice, and there should be sort of all kinds of perks that go along with it. And I think that kind of attitude has meant that a kind of productive orientation towards economic life is in some decline at the moment.
Had anything to do with some of that decline?
I didn't hear you, I'm afraid.
Do you think the furlough, so a lot of people furloughed during the pandemic, do you think that has had quite a great impact on the mentality of people now in terms of work?
I think it's been a tragedy in many ways. I think that the furlough, encouraging people to work out of home, discouraging people from coming into the office, has normalized the idea that the distinction between your personal life and your work life should be eroded somehow. That if you're sitting at home in your digital bedroom and occasionally, picking up the phone and talking to people, that's just as good as if you're in an office and talking to people around the water cooler. And the unfortunate thing, and we all know this, is that the really important gains in life, the really productive experiences require physical interaction between us. And I think that to some extent has been delegitimated by the furlough. And the government has got a lot to answer for discouraging us from actually getting on with our work life in a normal kind of a way.
Well, thank you so much for talking to us. That's Frank Furedi. He's been talking to us with regard to whether the British public are lazy. He's a sociologist and a social commentator. Thank you so much. Really good to talk to you. Crikey. So what do you think? Well, of course, it's COVID, monkeypox, all those things stop you from going out and meeting anybody, let alone working. You're with me, I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. On the way, we'll continue with our Great British Debate this hour. I'm asking, has furlough made the British public lazy? You'll hear the thoughts of my panel, former Liberal Democrat MP Lemon Opik, and also consulting editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce. But first, let's get your latest news headlines.
Nana, thank you. The top stories on GB News. The Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries is calling for a formal investigation into the violent scenes at the Champions League final in Paris last night between Liverpool and Real Madrid. The government's investigating what UK police says was the worst violent scene at a European football match recently. UEFA says thousands of fans tried to enter the grounds with fake tickets. President Zelensky has visited troops on the front lines in the northeast of Ukraine today. The visit marks his first official appearance outside Kyiv since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion in February. Ukraine's military say their forces are continuing to resist Russia's assault in the east. Officials say Severodonetsk, the largest city they still hold in the Donbass region, was weathering heavy artillery barrages today. In the United States, President Joe Biden and his wife Jill are with the community mourning those killed in the school shooting in Texas last week. 19 primary-age children and 2 of their teachers were murdered by a gunman at Robb Elementary School in the town of Uvalde. It's the third mass shooting in the US in the last few weeks. And tributes are pouring in for the legendary jockey Lester Piggott, who's died at the age of 86. An 11-time champion and winner of 30 classics, he was widely regarded as one of the greatest riders of all time. Fellow jockey Frankie Dettori says Lester was a hero and the impact he had on racing was second to none. The chief executive of British Racing, Rod Street, added Lester was a true titan of the sport who transcended horse racing. You're up to date on TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News and Nana Akua is back in just a moment.
We are
GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you.
And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
So it's coming up to 37 minutes after 5 o'clock. If you've just joined in, welcome on board. I'm Nana Akua. This is GB News on TV, online and on digital radio. Now we return to the Great British Debate, and this hour I'm asking, Has furlough made the British public lazy? Redundancy is at a record low, with just 70,000 people losing their jobs between January and March this year. So I want to ask if the increase in job security and working from home has made the country complacent and pretty much lazy. Let's see what my panel make of that. Today, I'm asking, has furlough made the British public lazy? And I'm joined by Lembit Opik and also Andrew Pearce. So what do you think, Andrew? There's a lot of furlough, loads of people on furlough. I mean, they spent, initially 11 billion on furlough. That went up to around about, it was 70 billion in total, actually, was spent on furlough.
Billions disappeared in fraud, too.
Yeah.
I don't think furlough's necessarily made us lazier, but I think it's made us very dependent now. We think the government has to do so much more for us. You hear sometimes retailers saying, I'm really struck, people aren't coming into my shop. What are the government going to do about it? No, it's not the government's job to put money in shopkeepers' tills. The problem with furlough is, as your guest said, it's encouraged people to stay at home, work from home, and they're missing out on really important social skills, particularly young people. Look, we brought our newspaper out, the Daily Mail, for the first few weeks. We were all at home. One person was in the building. You'd press the button to literally let the pages go. The paper was fine, but you missed interaction. You can only do so much on Zoom. Yeah. You need to be in there talking, discussing, and that applies to a lot of businesses. And I think that's the real problem about furlough. Look at the blooming train drivers. Are they mad to go on strike? 20% fall in volume in business because so many people are now working from home. If these train drivers go on strike again, even more people will get used to staying at home and they won't go on the trains and they'll lose their jobs.
People often, but they argue that they're just as productive, which I think that's not a truth argument at all. It's nonsense because we've all tried to ring a public sector service.
Good luck.
Good luck with that. I mean, the Home Office, you'd be lucky to get your passport if you want to go away.
Story in the papers today that you're going to have to wait months and months to take your driving test. That's because of the chaos.
That's right,
because they're working from home.
Well, it's down to whether you see the government as giving you a hand up or a hand out. And I think that mindset's changed, a bit like what Andrew said. Lazy might not be exactly the right word, but I do think there's a kind of an expectation, a sense of entitlement now. Yeah. But
isn't that lazy? I mean, you know, people who expect things being given to them, they can't be bothered to do it themselves. They're expecting it. If you were to use the cruelest term, it's probably lazy.
Okay, you could use the word lazy, but it depends whether you work to live or live to work. I love what I do. I'm really excited by it. And Andrew's vocation and yours is actually a vocation. It's not just, oh, I can't wait for this to finish. But a lot of people don't really like what they do. What better solution than stay at home, make it look like you're working while you're watching EastEnders omnibus?
Nobody watches that, sorry. Not GBNews, EastEnders.
Sorry, other stations are obviously available. And so people have got now these tricks which they share about how to make it look like you're working when you're at home. Great for kids if you want to spend time with them and if they weren't at school. So I actually think it's now created a division. I'll work wherever I am because I love what I do. If you don't like what you do, it's kind of giving you a way out. And you can stick your hand in the government's face saying, come on, you owe this to me because I've suffered so badly.
And also the explosion in online purchasing during the pandemic. People used to go to shops. Now they're getting used to having everything delivered. I live in a flat. I'm bombarded with Amazon. I don't ever use Amazon. It's not for me. It's for other flats, and that never used to happen before the pandemic. But now it's a constant bombardment. People no longer go to. Why don't you go to a bookshop and buy a book and look how you enjoy browsing?
They're scared of COVID and monkeypox now. We're scared of everything, aren't we?
I like Amazon. I like the home delivery because it's stuff.
Like they don't pay any tax.
Well, that's a different thing. That's a different debate. As far as I'm concerned, it's a labour-saving device for me to be able to get those things done so that I can work more on the things that I want to do. But when it comes down to summarise it in one sentence, if you don't like your work, this is just a green card to take your foot off the gas. And what's the boss going to do? Go around 40 houses? Drive around all day just checking what you're doing? Because you can't really tell exactly how hard someone's working from a distance.
Well, it's something Andrew said as well. It's the expectation, isn't it? Now people expect to be helped out. So with the fuel situation, we would have had to... When Margaret Thatcher was in power and interest rates were going up in double figures and everything, there weren't handouts so much. She did have a windfall tax in a way, but there weren't the handouts. You had to spend less, you had to do another job, you had to find a way. People lost their homes. People had to accept the situation. There wasn't just money being given out. Now... we're the first to say, oh, we need some help, or we need some... You need government...
a dependency culture.
And so people... So when I say lazy, I actually mean Well, in a way, yeah, because if it's me and I haven't got enough money, I try and get another job, or the last thing I think of is, oh, I'm going to go on benefits. And obviously, I'm not saying that people go on benefits and they're happy with that. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that a mindset is created where we're more accepting of that.
The reason I wrestle with the word lazy, it makes it sound like people are just work shy. I think what's actually happened, maybe this is the right word, we've stopped people being proactive, going out and doing it, and becoming reactive, waiting for people to do stuff for them. And if you tell someone, well, you can sit at home and you'll still be okay, and maybe your lifestyle will be a little bit less affluent, but you'll more or less be able to do everything, then why would you go into the office where you didn't like your boss in the first place, and frankly, it was an hour to get in?
Yeah. But what I thought was astonishing, and the guy from the Express talking about lunch with diplomats, saying there's no one in the Foreign Office to talk to. Well, why doesn't the government lead by example? Boris Johnson keeps going on about it. So does tell civil servants, you will work in Whitehall from your desk. And don't forget, a lot of them are in receipt of very lucrative London waiting allowance, which is thousands of pounds. That's to help towards their commuting costs and the fact it's more expensive to work in London. I'm not saying all civil servants are in London, so they should be back in. But all around the country, the government should say, you're back to your desks on Monday.
But Jacob Rees-Mogg did try that, didn't he?
Well, they should order them. They're the employer.
I'll pull you up on this one. Boris Johnson has led by example, because we now know in Downing Street people have been there working till 2 or 3 in the morning.
And there were no parties.
well, apparently not.
So, in short, then, you don't think they're lazy?
No, they're reactive. I don't think they're lazy, just reactive.
Yeah, but in a way, the fact that I think people's work ethic has changed substantially now, and people are more. I agree with the nice balance of flexi working and things like that. But if it affects productivity, then I think we need to start sort of rebalance this. And the government, although this wonderful £400 has been great and giving handouts, my concern is obviously it needs to be paid back. And when the next problem comes, will people be expecting to be given more money?
Yeah, that's a very good point, because people talk about, what is the government doing to help me? Every penny the government gives us to help us through the fuel crisis, we're paying for through our taxes. Let's not forget that. When people say public money, Mrs Thatcher, didn't she always say, it's not public money, it's the people's money. That's whose money it is.
The other tricky thing is that if you really are industrious, there was an entire trade in getting huge loans, unsecured loans from the government, and that's where the fraud was. It's not so much the little people, 50 grand here and all that other stuff. So we've now created an opportunistic culture. Why? Because governments are terrible at accounting for money.
Well, let's see what you had to say, because this show is nothing without you. Lots of you have been getting in touch with your views. Tony says, off your bums and back to work. Furlough is over. If a company is struggling financially, then working from home in that situation is the only realistic reason for sitting on one's bum. Pinder says, working from home is not inefficient. I'm saving over 2 hours per day by not travelling to work. Working from home allows a better work-life balance. Yes, it might be for you, Pinder, but what about you? Do you religiously do the time from 9 to 5 or whatever the hours are? Because a lot of people, you try calling those government departments and it's 2 hours waiting for one call.
And town halls are the same.
Actually, airlines, private companies, they massively downscale. You can wait 40 minutes just to change a ticket.
Jill says, yes, furlough has made some people lazy. However, if I work from home, I would too. It's true, isn't it? If you work from home, you would. Billy says, yes, Nana, Britons have become lazy since the furlough scheme. Furthermore, our youngsters seem to think that they are above working and all they want to do is go to uni and study social sciences that are totally non-productive. We need people to produce items that are useful and grow food to feed us. She makes a good point, actually, doesn't she? It's the mindset that we're teaching the younger generation who have been watching a lot of X Factor and all those you get online and you've got all these so-called followers and this is your sign of wealth that so many people like you or follow you, and everything seems to come easy, and a lot of people making money out of that.
Yeah, but actually people work incredibly hard on their social network sites.
Oh, yeah, right.
And they spend hours a day just pressing the button so they can be famous, like you, Nan.
No, like you, Lemmit. You were famous before I was, but for, well, all the wrong reasons.
Well, thanks very much for that. Couldn't resist it, could you?
Chris says, those who think they can work from home long-term are misguided. Within 2 years, they'll be made redundant as they will no longer be relevant in the workplace. You make some good points. Well, keep your thoughts coming. We'd love to hear from you. Recent figures from the Office of National Statistics show that the number of people getting married, so we're moving on to the next subject, sorry, it was so seamless, is at the lowest rate since records began in 1862. Are you married? Is it a good thing. How long have you've been married? It's led to the Mail online columnist Peter Hitchens to warn that dismantling the institution of marriage will have a bad impact on children and the wider society. He says that the outcomes for children are deprived of the traditional unit are much worse than those brought up in conventional married parents. So why are the numbers of people getting married smaller, and how is that harming society? Let's have a chat with divorce coach Sarah Davidson, who is also somebody who got divorced. You were married once. Sarah, what do you think? Is it why are so few people getting married?
Hi, Nana. Thanks for having me back. Well, I do think that attitudes have changed to marriage. I do think that now we dream of having a happy and healthy relationship rather than going in for that marriage, the legal side of it. I think actually we're quite happy with a good relationship. And remember that divorce has notoriously been a really unpleasant, difficult and quite traumatic process. So if you're in a happy relationship, why get married? I think this is something that a lot of people have changed their opinions about. And it's just not as important anymore.
You don't think? You don't think? Well, I mean, if a billionaire asked me to marry him, I'd bite his hand off. The reason I don't get married, Sarah, is because I'm looking for somebody considerably richer than myself, because otherwise I'm going to have to split my stuff, and I'm not doing it. Well, listen, Sarah, so very briefly then, what do you think then for marriage as an overall institution? Because earlier I spoke to a guy called Errol, and it was the divorce of his parents that led him to, and he ended up in prison, and he said that that was the pivotal moment. So do you think that marriage is actually better for society?
Look, if you're in a happy, healthy marriage, then I think, yes, it is great for society, and I think it's great for kids. And talking about Errol there, you know, having that stability and security and a happy childhood with both parents who are functional in a happy, loving relationship. However, if those parents are not getting on and there is a toxic, unhealthy environment at home, then obviously staying together for the kids, even if you're arguing a lot or maybe you're sleeping in separate rooms, maybe it's fizzled out, really isn't healthy, because the kids are learning what is love and what is a relationship all about from you as adults. They are looking up to you as role models. So if it's not working, that's the lesson they're learning and taking forward. So if it's happy and healthy, great, I'm all for it. But if it's toxic and not working, then my advice would be to get out, because that would be healthier in the long run.
For sure. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us. That's Sarah Davidson. She's a divorce coach. You ever been married, either of you two, Ian and Lembit?
Who's Ian?
Ian.
Oh, God, sorry. Oh, God, you Ian. Lembit, what do you think?
That's grounds for divorce.
Is it?
No, I've always enjoyed being engaged, but I've never gone any further. Because I think that Sarah's really right. If all that keeps you together is a contract, it's not going to be a very loving relationship. No. In some ways, maybe you have to work harder if it's not down on a piece of paper at the City Hall.
Well, I'm in a civil partnership, and I love it being in a civil partnership.
Yeah.
It didn't happen until it's 10 years next year, and it happened so I was 50-something, and I never thought it happened. And I really like it, and it's great. And it's not the piece of paper, it was just the commitment. And I'm a big champion of marriage. My parents were married for 49 years. My sister's been married for nearly 50 years. I mean, we're pretty good at marriage in our family.
Oh, I'll tell the truth. Nobody wants me.
Because no one's rich enough.
Well, that's true. When I get a millionaire, then that'll be good. No, I like the... I mean, it's a nice idea, but to me, I think it's an ideal. And I also think there's some people who don't suit marriage, and I'd probably say that
There's another more down-to-earth reason people don't get married. It's so flipping expensive. Apparently, the average marriage is to cost £22,000.
Much more if you get divorced.
Yeah,
exactly.
The thing is, you've got what people would want. I feel from what you're saying that if you want somebody so much, then it's a logical thing to do it all. But not everybody feels that way. And so I envy you.
Yeah. Oh, so what have you just said live on air to your partner? Honestly.
I know, I envy you. I envy you, Nana, for your ambition.
Right.
Oops, no, OK, I can't dig myself out of that one.
Dig yourself out. I'd like to see that. Right, it's time for Supplement Sunday. This is the part of the show where me and my panel look at some of the other stories that are making the papers today. I'm joined now by former Liberal Democrat Lembit Opit and also consulting editor for the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce. Right, we'll start with the story about imperial measurements. Yes.
Well, they never really left in my world. At my local greengrocer shop, you still buy your potatoes in pounds and ounces, and I know he thinks it's all a big stunt. Yeah, but the Crown is going to come back onto pint glasses for the first time since 2004, when the EU got rid of it. First around in William III. But before he has a rant about metric and pounds and ounces, do you ever hear someone refer to their bouncing baby as 4 kilos? No, it's a £6 baby. And also, we buy a pint of milk and we buy a pint of beer, so why can't we go imperial for the whole hog?
Actually, yes. When I was an MP, I saved the pint. There's evidence. I went to the European Commission and I said, this is ridiculous because we're just going to sell 568 millilitres instead. And this is the amazing thing. He listened to me with his aide and he went, all right, we won't do it. And I went, is that it? He went, yeah. And so that was it. That's how it works in Europe. So there you are. I saved the British pint. Very good. Never got any thanks for it, by the way.
Gone up even further in my estimation considering he was a Liberal Democrat.
Exactly.
Yeah, well, OK, we're not going down that path.
No. Well, Boris Johnson's actually going to pave the way for the return of pounds and ounces, but as Andrew said, it hasn't really left, has it? But in British shops mainly, that's ahead of the Platinum Jubilee. On Friday, the government will publish proposals to repeal the EU-driven law requiring metric units to be used for all trade with only limited exceptions. Yes, I like that. I also want the return of the half-p, though, because when I was young, you could buy 40 sweets for 10p, 2 sweets for half-p, which gave you 40 if you had 10p.
First thing I ever bought in my life was a packet of Tato smoky bacon crisps for 7D in 1970.
7D? What?
Or 69, yeah.
Yeah,
Wow.
pre-decimalisation.
Yeah.
Now, Lembit, you've got one from The Sun. What's that all about?
Well, it's Airport Story.
Oh, no.
If you've tried to travel anywhere this weekend, dream on. Lots of people have made it, but EasyJet, for example, cancelled 200 flights. They've cut it down by saying it's only 24 flights a day. It's like 35,000 people who probably haven't travelled for the last 2 years. No. You had people on aircraft waiting to leave. They said, I'm afraid you're going to have to get off because our time's up and so forth. So the whole thing has been thrown into chaos. Now, I would suggest EasyJet and the other airlines might have known that people who booked their tickets 6 months ago were going to turn up for the flight. Seems to be a couple of problems here. Bristol Airport's been described as a zoo, incidentally, because everyone's milling around there and other places. First of all, they cut lots of staff. And we'll talk about that. And so they haven't re-employed them, perhaps because they're not available anymore, because they have found others. And the second reason is just because they say it's an IT mess. Disaster. Try harder.
Are you going anywhere nice? Are you planning to fly somewhere?
Not for a while, for that reason. Because I can't bear the thought of spending hours at an airport, or worse, you're all packed, ready to go, and you get the phone call the night before your flight's cancelled. It's just too disappointing. The British Isles are marvellous.
They are, aren't they? I think I might go to North Wales.
Lovely.
Lovely.
Great.
So a good advert for that on GBNews.
Yeah, Anglesey. When I was very young, we went to a place called Cornellin Manor in Anglesey.
Sounds lovely.
Yeah.
Innismorn.
It was lovely. I won a prize.
Innismorn.
The best saleswoman, or sailing woman, in my little thingy thing. Right, well, listen, on today's show, we've been asking, is Boris Johnson an asset or a liability? According to our Twitter poll, actually not much has changed. It's remained at 57% of you say, well, he's an asset, and 43% of them say he's a liability. Panel, your final thoughts on Boris Johnson. Will he survive?
I think he will, and I think he'll lead the Tories into the next general election and win. Particularly against Keir Starmer.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, as long as Starmer's there, Boris has a chance. If Labour have changed their leader, then it would be more difficult. I'll think he's got 6 months. I can't really guess the answer. It's all down to the polls in November, and if they're still trailing, Boris is going to get a knock on the door from the 1922 committee and say, you're probably going to have to join the job queue.
Well, I think perhaps he should call his own vote of no confidence anyway. Well, I've got to say thank you so much to my panel. Joining me today, consulting editor of the Daily Mail, Andrew Pearce. Andrew, thank you very much for coming in and joining us.
Thanks for seeing you again.
And also former Liberal Democrat MP Lembit Opik. And as ever, a big thank you to you at home for joining me today. I'll be back at same time, same place on Friday at 4, in fact, no, Thursday, for the Jubilee. I'll leave you with the weather. Enjoy.
Looking ahead to this evening's weather, and the UK is looking showery at first, although with showers fading away to leave clear spells. Let's take a look at those details. For Devon and Cornwall, a mixture of showers and sunny spells. The showers will still be on the heavy side at first, but will die away through the evening. For London, the evening is looking largely dry with some sunny spells, although the risk of a few showers remains. For Cardiff and South Wales, a few showers are likely this evening, but for many it will be dry with some sunny spells. It's a similar story across Birmingham and the Midlands, where the evening promises to give a scattering of mainly light showers with variable amounts of cloud and some sunny spells. A cloudier picture across parts of north-east England this evening, with a few spots of rain and some bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool along the east coast with wind off the sea. Rather cloudy at times for Edinburgh and southern Scotland, with a few showery outbreaks, but also with bright or sunny spells. Feeling cool, especially towards the east or under thicker cloud. And for Northern Ireland, the evening will see a familiar mix of sunny spells and a few scattered light showers, perhaps a touch breezy along the north coast. A dry night for most away from Scotland, cloudier in the north and turning chilly in the south under clear skies. And that's how the weather's shaping up overnight into tomorrow morning.
Join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain every Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m. A news hour that comes with a trigger warning. Scorching hot opinion with prominent guests saying the unsayable and a little bit of weekend fun thrown in. Unlike other broadcasters, I won't be forgetting what the B in our name stands for. So howie in for Real Britain Saturday and Sunday from 2 p.m.
We are GB News.
We're right across this great nation.
On TV, on radio, on digital.
Absolutely everywhere. We don't talk down to you.
We embrace all voices.
With honest and civilised conversation.
We're not part of the establishment.
We're one of you. And we're only getting started.
Join us on GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, the comedy panel show that's just like the news, in that the left fights the right and it doesn't really seem to matter who wins. We cover the big stories. It was in fact a troop of baboons and not angry vegans.
I like that.
And the really important stories.
Fat naked cow gets stuck in swimming pool.
It's a headline in a lot of local newspapers. Yeah.
We're on the same team, Nick. Yeah, but I'm just helping you.
Join us for Ministry of Offence, Saturday nights, 8 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
The top stories on GB News this evening. The Culture Secretary Nadine Dorries is calling for a formal investigation into the violent scenes at the Champions League final in Paris last night between Liverpool